Welcome, everyone. We are excited to have you with today. I am Mary Beth Gassman and am at Rutgers University. I also have the honor of serving as the executive director for the Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice and the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions, which are the sponsors of today's event. And I am very excited about the talk today. I did want to just give a thank to our tech folks today, including Natalie Passoff and Brandy Jones, who make sure that our program goes well. Natalie will be taking a look in the Q&A for any of your questions and making sure that we get those answered. This talk is part of a larger academic series that we have, which is called Let's Talk About the Humanities and is sponsored by the Mellon Foundation. And we love to feature faculty across the country who are doing great work in the humanities on all different types of topics. And so today we have with us, and she'll introduce her own presentation, but we have with us Moshoula Capous-Desyllas, and she is a professor of sociology at California State University, Northridge. For those of you who don't know her well, her research interests and passions involve the use of arts-based research methodologies as a form of activism for social justice and as a way to highlight the voices of marginalized individuals, groups, and communities. Over the past 14 years, Moshoula has facilitated numerous community-based Photovoice projects with marginalized populations, including individuals working in sex trades, LGBTQ populations, immigrant populations and refugees, foster youth, LGBTQ foster youth, and grandparent caregivers, and a whole variety of other groups that she is going to talk about. She also uses a variety of theoretical approaches and, as I mentioned, methodological approaches, which she's going to talk about today in her talk. I'm very excited to learn, and we hope that you will have lots and lots of questions for her. So I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Moshoula Capous-Desyllas, and I'm so excited to share my research with you, and I really appreciate your time today. The title of my presentation is Queer Lens in Focus, a Photovoice project with LGBTQ+ refugees and displaced people living in Athens, Greece. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a background for this project. This research is informed by my own personal story of diaspora as a first-generation Greek-American, queer, artist, activist, academic who is intimately connected to social justice issues surrounding the intersections of migration and sexuality. Greece is where I call home. It's between, if we're looking at the map geographically, Greece is between Italy and Turkey, and all of my family lives there. I have a huge family. My mother comes from a family of 12 children. My father comes from a family of 7 children, and everyone is in Greece. And so I had the opportunity to spend 2 years of the pandemic with family in Greece. And it was a huge honor and privilege to be with my family during the pandemic and also during my sabbatical. And so this research that I'm sharing with you today was conducted during my sabbatical research right before the pandemic. And so it was a time where there was media attention on the European debt crisis and the Syrian refugee crisis in Greece. And there was also an increased social presence of the far right factions, the Golden Dawn, and there was a lot of homophobic rhetoric in the Greek parliament. And I kept reading about this increase in violence against LGBTQ and undocumented queer people. And so when I was, since I'm really connected in country, I'm always trying to find academic articles, news articles. I want to know what's happening. And I was seeing that there were no documented experiences of LGBTQ plus people in Greece who might also identify as refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, or displaced people. And so the voices of LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers were missing. I did find some very, very few newspaper articles, but I really wanted to contribute to the academic literature on this topic. So it was really important for me to engage in research where I would merge my intersecting identities as a social worker, as an academic, as a researcher, as an activist, as an artist. Currently, I'm housed in the sociology department at CSU Northridge, but my background is in social work. So I was a practicing social worker for many years before I entered academia. But as an immigrant, I was really excited with the arts and being able to express myself through the arts. English was not my first language. Greek is my first language, so oftentimes as an immigrant, it was hard for me to express myself in English, and I always used art as a form of expression. But when I told my parents, my immigrant parents, I wanted to do art, they said, we did not come to this country so that you could do art. And so that was always a passion of mine that was unfulfilled. And so as I've entered academia, I've been able to merge my passion for art, my passion for social justice, my passion for uplifting and amplifying the voices of marginalized people through Photovoice methodology. So I embarked on this research with the following research questions. I wanted to know what are the lived experiences of LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers during a time of economic crisis in Greece, increased hostility towards migrants, and discrimination against LGBT people in Greece. I wanted to know what were the challenges and struggles that they faced related to their intersecting identities, specifically their LGBTQ identity and the displaced individuals' undocumented status. How did LGBTQ plus refugees and undocumented people navigate these challenges? What were their current needs, aspirations, and hopes for the future? What were their sources of strength and support? And so the theoretical and practical frameworks that inform my research is intersectional feminist theory that examines how social identities along the lines of race, class, ethnicity, gender, ability status, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, and citizenship status, how do these social identities intersect to inform people's lived experiences of privilege, power, and oppression? Queer theory also informed this research project, as queer theory rejects binaries and maintains the idea of fluidity, embodied, socially constructed, and self-constructed aspects of social identity. Paulo Freire's 1970 approach to empowerment education, so this idea that education equals individual liberation and knowledge is created actively in dialogue, so that critical thinking and sharing personal experiences and ideas leads to praxis. And then a participatory approach to documentary photography informed this research project, which is a movement in the 1970s and 80s where professional photographers, instead of taking photographs of marginalized communities, started to give cameras to marginalized communities so they could document their own experiences. So what I did is I used Photovoice methodology. And Photovoice methodology was created and coined by Langdon Burris in 1997. And it is a methodology, a qualitative arts-based methodology that involves giving cameras to individuals who use photography to identify, represent, and enhance their communities. So the three main goals of Photovoice is to enable people to record and reflect their community strengths and concerns, to promote critical dialogue and knowledge about important issues through large and small group discussions of photographs, and to reach policymakers and people who can be mobilized for change. Okay, so it was really important for me to be able to use Photovoice methodology with a marginalized population like LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers, because they are the expert in their own lives. And when we give them the power to take photographs and represent their lived experiences, we place the power, definition, and representation in their hands. What's really nice about giving marginalized individuals cameras or allowing them to, or inviting them to use their cell phones to document their lived experiences, they don't have to respond on the spot like with interviews. They can take the time to take photographs of their experiences, their thoughts, their ideas, and then reflect on those, and then share those through the interviews. Photography allows individuals to make statements that might be really difficult to convey in words. So sometimes we just can't find those words to share how we're feeling, but art can be a really powerful tool to share those thoughts and ideas and experiences. Photovoice is really powerful because there's a shared ownership of the research. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about the power of Photovoice methodology. But Photovoice also provides opportunities to build community and empowerment, because the idea is that participants in Photovoice methodology go out into their community, they photo document their lived experiences, they engage in individual and group dialogue about their photographs, about their lived experiences, and they take those photographs and those testimonies and their narratives, and they share those thoughts and ideas in a curated art exhibit with the general public. So what I love about this methodology is that it doesn't keep academic knowledge in academia. You have academic knowledge that is generated, guided by the participants themselves, and then shared with an audience beyond academia. And so I'm going to share with you how I implemented Photovoice methodology. When I initially went to Greece, I reached out to a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations that were gaining funding from the United Nations. And the organizations really didn't want to work with me. I'll be honest, I had not built relationships with these NGOs, but I tried to reach out to them. I met with the directors of many of the non-governmental organizations and nonprofit organizations, but I was unable to build those relationships. They didn't know who I was. They saw me as an academic coming from the United States. Once I let them know that I didn't have funding to do this research, it was all self-support, there was no interest in collaboration. And so I immersed myself in the community, working with refugees and asylum seekers in informal squats. And so I was working with other activists, other solidarians in Greece who were just volunteering their time, working with refugees and asylum seekers who had been living in abandoned buildings, really squatting in various areas of the city. And so through my volunteer work, I was able to meet some individuals who were part of the LGBTQ+ Refugees Welcome Collective. And this was a collective that felt like the needs of LGBTQ+ refugees and asylum seekers were not being met through the NGOs. And so they created a grassroots collective, sort of like a mutual support aid group that was saying, if our needs cannot be met through these formal nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, we're going to create our own collective so that we can provide each other with support. And so I collaborated with the Refugees Welcome Collective. They invited me to their meetings. I was able to meet a lot of diverse individuals who were part of this collective and who were doing really incredible grassroots social justice work. And so the eligibility requirements to participate in this project was that participants had to be at least 18 years or older, LGBTQ+ identified, and also a displaced person, a refugee or asylum seeker. And so when I met the individuals through the LGBTQ+ Refugees Welcome Collective, collectively together, we came up with Photovoice prompts. I explained the project, the Photovoice method and approach, and we talked about the participants taking photographs of what their ideas were around their concepts of home, their identity, their needs, their aspirations, and their perceptions of the refugee crisis. In the LGBTQ+ Refugees Collective, there were also individuals who identified as LGBTQ+, but did not necessarily identify as refugees. So it was a collective made up of diverse identities, but the common identity that everyone had was identifying as part of the LGBTQ+ community. And so within the collective, there were translators. And so when I would attend the meetings that the collective held once a week, there were individuals who were Arabic translators, French translators, and Spanish translators. And so They were invited to participate in this project because some of the participants did not speak English. And so the interviews were conducted in English, but with Arabic, French, and Spanish translators, depending on the participants' language, native language. And so once we determined what the themes of the photos would be, the individuals who participated, 14 individuals participated, they went out into the communities and they took photographs of their lived experiences and their thoughts and ideas and experiences around these prompts. And then once they were done with their photographs, we met individually and we did in-depth interviews that lasted anywhere between an hour to 2 hours with the appropriate translator. And then after everyone completed a 1 to 2 hour in-depth interview where they had the opportunity to share the meanings behind their photographs, all of the participants were invited to a group dialogue session where the participants shared their photographs with one another, and we brainstormed around how do we want to share these photographs with a broader community? How do we want to curate a photographic art exhibit? Where do we want to have this art exhibit? Who do we want to invite to this art exhibit? How do we want to get our voices out there with regards to what are the experiences for LGBTQ plus refugees? What are their needs? What are their aspirations? What are some of the things that we need to bring to the attention to social workers, to policymakers, to the broader public in terms of educating individuals about the lived experiences of the community? And the individuals also generated biographies where they had the opportunity to write their artist biography, who they were, where they came from, and they had the opportunity to help curate the art exhibit. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of the participants. And it was 14 participants in total, and their ages ranged from 20 years old to 42 years old. They were from Syria, Cameroon, Uganda, Cuba, Iraq, and Pakistan. And there were 9 individuals who identified as cis males, 4 trans females, 1 individual who identified as gender fluid, 1 person who identified as a cis female. In terms of sexual orientation, 9 identified as gay, 4 identified as heterosexual, 1 person identified as a lesbian. And these are the pseudonyms of the 14 participants. And so you'll see on the left their names and then some of their intersecting identities. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share some of the themes that emerged and some of the photographs. So the participants talked about their perceptions and stereotypes of the refugee crisis. They talked about the importance of dignity and respect and humanity, moving beyond the label of refugee. They also talked about racism and hierarchy among refugees, and the refugees who came from Cameroon and Uganda felt like they were even more marginalized than the refugees who came from Syria. They talked about their journey from Greece. They talked about their travel stories. Many of them wanted to share photographs that they had taken while they were crossing the borders and while they were in boats. And so some individuals shared photos that they had already taken while they were traveling, and many participants took new photographs to share their ideas and their perspectives and experiences of what they were going through. They talked about the violence that they experienced along the journey. They talked about their struggles upon arriving to Greece, how they experienced homelessness and a lack of food security. The UN and governmental financial assistance was not enough. Many of them wanted to leave Greece and they wanted to go to Amsterdam, where there were more rights for LGBTQ plus folks. Many of them wanted to go to Western Europe because there were more opportunities because of Greece's economic struggles. They talked about their language barriers. They felt like prisoners, not free, but they also talked about their sources of empowerment. And one of the big sources of empowerment was the community that they found. So I'm going to share just some photographs. On the left, Saad shared, "We are trying to survive despite the struggles. We are lucky to have each other." And then Lawrence said, I need people to stop seeing us as these fragile refugees and making this our single story, because this is how you rob people of their dignity. More photos from the perspective of the refugee crisis. We are trying to still be strong and in life with nice smiles, but in a bad situation. This is a picture of me and my boyfriend on the boat from Samos to Athens. It was a very nice time, and I was so happy to be free after 10 months of being on the island and stuck in camp. We couldn't go anywhere. We were stuck. Okay. John said, because we are Kurdish, we don't have freedom, we don't have an identity, we don't have a country. There's no solution. Binad shared, since I'm Kurdish, the Turkish police beat me up. I was in the hospital for 2 months. Since then, I've had problems with my head and knee. Tamara said, I walked for nearly 10 days to arrive to Greece. And then the next photo, here we can see the more difficult side of the experience of refugees. You can see here our clothes, which we did not lose along the way, but we couldn't stop walking. Because and I'm having a hard time finishing that quote because of because we wanted to stay alive. Faiz says, life vests, waiting for a new life. And then Faiz also says, this is the campfire after the crossing. It's the relief after the struggle. Samrai says, this picture shows the refugee crisis in Greece. And then Godfrey says, as a refugee, I don't know where to sleep. I was sleeping outside for 4 months. Lawrence on the left says, any request for documentation comes with a long line of waiting. Just like everything for me as a refugee, I'm tired of waiting for my future. And John has a book with fruit and says, when I first came here, I didn't know the language. I used this little book as a refugee's guide, pointing to everything I wanted to communicate. The pictures were my interpreter. Patu says, the white race has a lot of advantages here in Greece, even among refugees. My photo symbolizes this, the white hand above the black. And Alan says, it's empty, we need to fill it, but as a refugee, there's no way to fill it. When I lived on the street, I ate at the NGOs. I didn't have any other option. With regards to concepts of home, a lot of the participants shared the oppression they experienced in their home country. They shared photographs of images, things, places that reminded them of their home country, memories of their mothers, their partners, their lovers, other meanings of home. And they also shared photos of the LGBTQ+ Refugees Welcome Collective that represent their meaning of home. So Alan says, behind bars, this feels like home back in Cameroon. There, homosexuals are not accepted. Neither the law nor religion nor society accepts us. And then Patu says, this photo represents Cameroon. It's very dark. This represents my suffering. The status of homosexuals in Cameroon is a life without a future. We live with hope, and at any moment, death is watching us. Samrai says, my TV lounge in Pakistan is my feelings of home. All of our family would sit together and watch TV in the evening. Family reminds me of home. And then Rihanna says, the smell of home, and presents the photo of the hookah. John says, my mother meant everything to me. She called out my name while in the throes of death, and I was not there to say goodbye. Her departure ruptured the entire family. This is what held us all together. And so John has that photo of his mother and his sisters. And then Memo on the right has the necklace of a cross and says, this is a gift for my mom. It's the link between me and them. It's like I'm living with them. Lawrence, photo of the tattoo, says, my mother's name means iris in Arabic. The crown is the ring is a crown. My mother, Sazwan, is the queen of my heart. And then John says, when I was 4, I was burned by hot tea and I lost the skin on my legs. My mother did not leave my side for a moment. She was my home. She was a tender mother. Sona says, my home, the person, not the place. This is where I belong. And she's hugging her partner. And Lawrence is kissing his partner and says, he's sweet and kind and he has the most generous heart. This is why I feel at home when I'm with him. Lawrence takes a photograph of members of the LGBTQ+ Refugees Welcome Collective. And they say, with them, I feel at home because no home is complete without family. And then Alan says, this represents my happiness and well-being. For me, when I'm around the collective, I am enfanu. This means I am blooming. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that in French. But Lawrence has a button on his beanie that says LGBTQ+ Refugees Welcome. With regards to identity, a lot of the participants took photographs of themselves, selfies, they express the freedom to be themselves, their ability to really express their sexualities, their sexual identity. They're taking pride and comfort rather than holding on to shame. They took photographs that affirmed their intersecting identities. And so Photovoice provided them with the opportunities to self-define and self-represent and reject heteronormative expectations and narratives that they had internalized from their country of origin. So Pinar on the left took the self-portrait and said, I can't escape from war, but I can't escape my sexuality. And then Rihanna took this self-portrait and said, sometimes I don't know if I'm a man or a woman. I hope that I will know within the next 10 years. Memo says, before I wanted to express myself, I was unable to, but now I can express myself freely. This is who I am. And Lawrence took this selfie and said, a Spartan warrior can be feminine and still conquer. I am proud of my femininity. Sona says, no money, no honey. I am proud of myself. And Lawrence says, rainbow flags, pink flamingos, fishnet stockings, and a fedora. I've got style, sass, and a joyful spirit, but I'm more than meets the eye. John said, I am gay and not ashamed of this emotional anomaly. And then Patu says, this represents my LGBT, I apologize. This represents my LGBTQ identity and my identity as a believer. We homosexuals are also believers and keep our big love to God. Sam Reyes took a photograph of him and his partner and said, I'm happy and comfortable with my sexuality. Love is very important to me. I didn't accept an arranged marriage to a woman because I wanted to spend the rest of my life in love with a man I really care about. And then Patu says, my strength is in the hands of God. It is he who is my only hope. I praise him every day so that he doesn't abandon me. I always pray. Tamara says, I feel like a strong woman. And then Rihanna says, migrant, feminist, Kurdish, queer, inter, transgender, feminine, homosexual, gay, lesbian. All we need is acceptance. Samiria says, this is from Carnival in Greece. I continued on dancing in the gay club. The owner of the club saw me and said, why don't you dance, love? And we'll pay you. It was a real success. And then Binad says, this group represents and defines who I am. And so this was at another march that the LGBTQI Refugees Welcome Collective participated in. A lot of the participants also shared their needs and challenges, and they talked about how they needed various things associated with being able to transition to the gender that most expressed them. They needed access to clothes and makeup and hair removal, hormones and ID, mental health support. They needed support with their sex worker identity. They needed to be kept safe from violence. They wanted job opportunities, financial support, education and assistance with Greek and English language. They wanted their voices to be heard, and they wanted to be able to experience love, passion, and happiness. So some of the needs and challenges that I wanted to share with you are, Binad says, I need hair like a woman. I want to wear makeup. Sona says, I need to have access to everything I need so that I can transition. For example, access to hair removal, hormones, and other important things. Sona says, I want to be accepted for who I am. Samara says, it's easier for me to enter a woman's bathroom than it is for me to obtain an ID that identifies me as female. Tamara says, obtaining an ID that says I am female is my biggest challenge. This is a nightmare that I want to get rid of. And John says, I need sleep. These are my eyes, the dark circles of a tired refugee, the sad pupils of eyes that have seen the loss of life. Rihanna says, I need for antidepressant pills. I need to see a psychiatrist, but they keep referring me to a psychologist. John says, before all of this, I didn't know that people take antidepressant medication to help them sleep. Today, I take it every night. Lawrence said, we once experienced a homophobic incident and the police did nothing when we asked for help. I hope a day will come when when the police will answer our 911 call without letting homophobia get the best of them. And Samiria said, I think that my life as a sex worker is a daily challenge and I must overcome. I'm always taking care of myself and taking care of others. Patu says, thank you to the government for this offer, but the ideal would be to create jobs with this money to allow refugees to occupy and have to give profitably to Greece. And then Alan says, I don't want to minimize this cash card that he would get, that all of the refugees got from the UNHCR. I'm very grateful for it, but it's not enough. Binada said, I need to find work here. I haven't been able to find work. I haven't learned Greek. It's very difficult. I need money. And Godfrey said, I need a job. Anything will be fine for me. Even if I can find a job selling things, I need any type of job. Baif said, my need for an education, opportunity for education. And Samaria said, it's my need to learn Greek. The organizations that allow us to learn Greek and integrate into society are important. Binad says, as refugees, we need our voices to be heard. And Rihanna says, I need safety, love, and peace. Binad said, I need passion in my life. And then Memo said, in the past, my friends and I would all gather together and sing while playing the Dubaleki. I need this back. I need to be happy again. The participants also shared their dreams and aspirations. They had so many visions for a brighter future. They shared how one person wanted to be a chef, another participant wanted to open up a dance school, many wanted to be makeup artists and beauticians. They all wanted to continue school. They wanted to travel to other countries in Europe. They wanted to be able to return to their country of origin. They were really sad and traumatized by oftentimes the war or the oppression against LGBTQ folks in their countries of origin. And they wanted to address larger social justice issues. So John said, cooking is my dream. I hope to have a kitchen one day and cook traditional Syrian cuisine. I love my job. Samaria said, it is my dream to open up a dance school here. Tamara shared, I aspire to be a makeup artist and a beautician. And Patu says, this is me going to school. My favorite pastime here in Greece is my studies, because after the effort comes the comfort. Saeed shared, this is my picture in Aleppo, my home city, Syria, which is 12,200 years old. I hope to visit this old and amazing city again when the war is over. And Binad says, this is my boyfriend in Germany. I hope that I can go there and see him. This is my dream. Alan says, free yourself from mental slavery. This represents the mentality that politicians and society have about homosexuality, especially in Cameroon. They need to be emancipated. I'm thinking about Bob Marley's Redemption song. And Lawrence said, I hope one day, a day will come when we don't have to march for our rights. I pray for the day when we can take our rights for granted, like all those who take theirs for granted, because they no longer struggle to achieve equality in the eyes of the masses. So I wanted to just wrap up the findings and just share some of the takeaway points from this project. 3 main takeaway points is acknowledging the diversity of experiences along a continuum of trauma and healing. Based on the participants' intersecting identities, their experiences were extremely diverse, but also there were common threads that connected them together. I also wanted to present an anti-carceral feminist lens to critique state-sanctioned violence that all of the participants experienced. And I also wanted to highlight the power of Photovoice methodology for understanding the experiences of LGBTQ+ refugees and asylum seekers. So the experience that the participants shared ranged from traumatic that were connected to oppression in their home country and in their journey to Greece, to empowerment connected to their feelings of safety and finding community while they were in Greece. And so connected to research that's already been done, Skinta and Nakamura also highlight how displaced and undocumented LGBTQ+ folks, based on their relative minority or majority status, as this intersects with their race, ethnicity, and religion, this can change in the context of how they experience safety and support at the different stages of their journey. Research by Khan, Alessi, Kim, Woolner, and Olivieri, their findings show how LGBT forced migrants found mental health supports and healing through building community connections. And this was a very strong finding in this project, is how important community was. And then Hein, Crooks, and Barragan highlight how that while social connections are critical for the integration of all forced migrants, cultivating these relationships are even more important for displaced and undocumented LGBTQ+ individuals who have experienced estrangement from their families and diaspora communities due to their gender identity and expression. So community was huge for the participants. I also wanted to highlight how there were various testimonies of violence against the participants by agents of the nation state, like Border Patrol agents and police officers, and various members of society due to homophobia and transphobia. So using an anti-carceral feminist lens, excuse me, using an anti, I'm sorry, 1 second. I apologize for that. Using an anti-incarceral feminist critique against state-sanctioned violence highlights how carceral feminism that was influenced by the second wave of feminism encourages women's reliance on law enforcement for violence intervention. And Elizabeth Bernstein coined the term anti-carceral feminism. Bernstein talks about the threat of being incarcerated is intended to deter violence from taking place, and law enforcement and border patrollers are used in the form of rescue feminism, whereby the actors of the state are positioned as saviors of women and marginalized people. Carceral feminist policies are grounded in neoliberalism and heteropatriarchy, which bolsters structural inequality and coercive power dynamics that are designed to criminalize marginalized individuals. Participants felt the need to hide their gender identity, sexuality, and work in the sex trades in order to avoid being targeted by humanitarian aid workers, border patrol, and the police who are working within the carceral state. So Elizabeth Bernstein highlights how we need to take an anti-carceral feminist approach so that we can reject state-sanctioned violence against marginalized individuals. And many of the participants talked about how they were targeted by border patrol agents, the police, humanitarian and aid workers, as well as the broader public. I also want to highlight the power of Photovoice methodology. Photovoice methodology provides displaced and undocumented LGBTQ+ individuals with the opportunity to reflect on their experiences and to preserve, create, and rewrite their experiences creatively. The power to use photography can deepen meaning, expand awareness, and cultivate an understanding of the intersections of what it means to be LGBTQ+ and displaced. Images allow for the opportunity to challenge singular narratives of experience and to move away from stereotypes about people's experiences. Photographs have the potential to challenge socially constructed binary notions of gender, thus making gender fluidity more visible. And then the verbal and visual testimonies highlight the varying levels of individual, social, systemic, and institutional oppression that each individual encountered depending upon their respective social locations and intersecting identities. So I shared a snippet of the photographs that the participants took, but there were quite a few challenges related to implementing this project. So when engaging in Photovoice methodology, it's important for researchers and community partners and activists to understand that this takes such a great deal of time, commitment, and follow through. It's expensive to implement the method. When co-curating an art exhibit, after the participants take their photographs and share their photographs and talk about the meaning of their photographs and come together to collectively think about how they want to present these photographs to the larger community, then we need to print their photographs. We need to connect those photographs to the captions and to the narratives. This takes a lot of time. We need to collect biographies that are written by the participants themselves, and coordinating how to display the photographs, which photographs to include, who to invite. All of this takes coordination, a time commitment, and a lot of collaboration, and negotiating different perspectives and different ways of wanting to share the voices of the community. And oftentimes it requires negotiating on different opinions and different wants and needs and desires. There were also ethical issues with the interpreters. And so one of the issues that I encountered is there were interpreters who were interpreting from Arabic to English, from French to English, and from Spanish to English. And I do speak Spanish, and so I didn't have any ethical issues or dilemmas that arose with my Spanish translators and my Spanish speaking participants. But there were ethical issues with the interpreters, with the one interpreter who was the Arabic translator, because he came from one of the similar villages from a few of the participants. And as a Syrian LGBTQ refugee and displaced person himself, there were stories that were shared by the other participants that he wanted to protect and he didn't want to share with me as the researcher. And so there were times during the interviews where I could tell that the participants wanted me to know something and they were arguing with the interpreter, and the interpreter was holding back that information. And so I would have to really check in with the interpreter and ask the interpreter, what's happening? It sounds like the participant wants me to know something and you're arguing. And after processing the interview with the interpreter, they had mentioned that indeed they were embarrassed to share that some of the participants were engaged in sex work because he didn't want me to judge or stereotype or engage in stigma because of their involvement in the sex industry, or assume that all of the Syrian refugees who are participating were involved in sex work. The other challenge of this project are the dilemmas of interpretation and representation. And so this project captures one moment in time. It's a snapshot of the participants and artists' lives. And so when we're representing these images, we don't know how they're going to be perceived by audience members. These are representation of these one moments in time. Often engaging in Photovoice research, I'll co-curate a community art exhibit, but then after time, the participants may no longer identify with that moment in their life. So for example, one of the participants at the time of this project identified as a gay cis male, but I'm still in touch with this participant, and now they identify as someone who's gender fluid and as queer, not as a cis gay male. And so it's important to understand that this is just a snapshot of their lives, but our lives are constantly changing and evolving, and the ways in which we make sense of our experiences also shift and change over time. There's also the question of who owns the data. And this was a challenge that I came across because after we co-curated this art exhibit, it was an incredible exhibit, and I'll share photographs from the exhibit that we held in Greece, in Athens, Greece, and also we held an art exhibit in Los Angeles. But the dilemma became who owns the data. And so the LGBTQ refugee collective that I collaborated with to implement this project said, well, we want all of the photographs and we want all of the data because we want to be able to use this data to promote our grassroots collective, to be able to generate funds to support other refugees and asylum seekers who identify as LGBTQ. But it was the 14 participants who are part of the LGBTQ collective who owned this data because these were their stories and their photographs. And so there was a lot of back and forth between who really owns this data. So I had to go back to my institutional review board, and my institutional review board, my IRB, said, well, who signed the consent form? It was the participants. It wasn't the LGBTQ collective, the refugee collective. And so when I gave the photographs and all of the interviews and the interview transcripts to each participant on a USB drive and all of their photographs from the art exhibit, physical photographs, I gave them to each participant, and I shared with each participant that they had the option then if they wanted to keep that data or give that data to the LGBTQ Refugee Plus Collective. And that ended up being the most ethical approach because I'm still in touch with the participants, and some participants are no longer part of that LGBTQ Refugee Plus Collective. And so they have that ownership of the data. So here's some some photographs of the art exhibit that we held in Athens, Greece, and it was just an incredible exhibit, so powerful and empowering. It was a 2-day exhibit. The participants were able to perform. If you see in the upper right-hand corner, that's one of the participants, Samaria, who presented. Some of the other participants were performing and belly dancing. We just had such an incredible time inviting loved ones, families, friends, social workers, people from the community, nonprofit organizations. So it was really a really powerful, festive event. And the LGBTQ Refugee Collective also saw this event as a fundraiser. And so we printed off some of the photographs, and we were selling them as postcards, and all of the proceeds went back to the collective. One of the participants who shared that he wanted to be a chef was actually making food for the event, so the audience members could purchase food, and all of the proceeds were going back into the collective. And so the participants in this project really wanted this research, Photovoice research project, to be a celebration of their lives, of their resilience, a way to educate the community about their experiences as LGBTQ refugees, and also a way to make money so that they could put that money back into providing services for LGBTQ plus refugees. I also brought this art exhibit to Los Angeles. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, I did this feminist ethnographic project in Greece, but it was part of my sabbatical. And so I promised my university that I would bring this project back to Los Angeles in the form of an art exhibit in LA. And all of the participants knew about this project, that this art exhibit would be presented again to the community in Los Angeles. And so these are some photographs of the ways in which I brought awareness about the issues that the participants shared to the community in Los Angeles. And I invited academics, activists, friends, family, social workers, policymakers, so that they could have a better understanding of what individuals who identified as LGBTQ plus and as refugees and asylum seekers experienced. So this arts-based project is significant in many ways. It used the power of photography to allow LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers to represent their lives from their own perspective. Using art allows for diverse ways of knowing and representing experience. The power of arts-based methods, specifically Photovoice, reaches an audience beyond academia. So it's not just keeping research in the academy, but it's taking that knowledge and sharing it with the community. These photos illuminate the strength and resilience of LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers as they negotiate their identity, as they express their hope for a better future, as they identify the resources that they need, as they grapple with physical and emotional and symbolic notions of home through photography. And these images document their migration to Greece, the loved ones they left behind, and the new communities they formed along the way, as they affirm their identities, build solidarity among one another and among themselves, and celebrate their survival. So I just want to thank you for listening. And this is a photograph that one of the participants shared, Lawrence, as they engaged in activism in their own communities, and they took a lot of pride in being able to express themselves in their new country, which was Greece, and as they were able to redefine themselves as LGBTQ plus displaced people. So thank you so much for sharing, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can take questions.
All right, thank you so much. That was so wonderful, and I love learning about how people approach research and just all of the many things involved in the work that you're doing. So I know it's weird to give a talk on Zoom, so I just want to give you a little applause.
Thank you, and I'm sorry about my voice for a second there. I needed to drink some water, so I apologize for that pause.
No worries. And we have lots of questions, and they are really good questions. So I'll just start by asking some of them from lots of different people. The first one is, which genealogy of intersection feminist theory are you using?
Ooh, beautiful question. My research project is informed by Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectional feminism.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Gina, and she says, did the list of themes in perspectives proceed or develop from the Photovoice experience? If they came from the Photovoice, what process did you use to identify your themes?
Oh, great question. So yes, the themes came from the Photovoice process, and I collectively came up with those themes with the participants. And what I did was, after I met with each participant to engage in an individual dialogue session. I had printed all of the photographs, and I brought those photographs from each participant to our group dialogue session, and we laid those participants out, those photographs out on poster boards for each participant. And together, collectively, we moved around photographs, and it was a beautiful, chaotic process that was just really fun, with laughter, with negotiating, what themes we wanted to highlight, and participants voted on which themes, after we looked at, wow, these are the themes that were emerging, which photographs we wanted to highlight. And so it was a lot of moving around photographs and engaging in dialogue with the participants about what their photographs meant, and really clarifying, this is actually part of my identity, and this is what I use to express myself in this way. So it was a lot of discussion, negotiation, checking in with participants after we collectively came up with the photos, and then meeting again to make sure, how we wanted to present the photographs. There was a lot of discussion around, do we want to present these photographs in the community art exhibit based on the themes, or do we want to present the photographs based on each artist's narrative? And so after discussion with the participants decided, yes, these are the themes that emerged, but we would like to have each of us have our body of images presented individually. And so rather than presenting the photographs in the art exhibit based on the themes that we had collectively come up with, each portion of a wall was dedicated to each participant. So, so each participant had a portion of the wall with their biography and their images, because they felt like, even though we collectively represent a group, a community, and we're united based on these themes, they each wanted to have the audience members experience their diverse and unique journeys as they navigated the world through their intersecting identities.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Another question is, how did you work to build these connections with your co-researchers? And also, if you're publishing this research, are you intending to co-write with your co-researchers? Those are really good questions. Yes. A lot of people are wondering about these days. So
yeah, and I think those are fabulous questions in terms of engaging in participatory research. I built these connections through time, building trust, sharing who I was, attending fundraising events, advocating on behalf of the participants in various community events that I was participating in during the time that I was engaging in this project. And I am still in touch with the participants, not all of them, but many of them. I've asked if any are interested in co-writing, but because of the language barrier, it's really difficult. And so I think that's one of the tensions when doing research projects like these, is I acknowledge that I have the privilege of gaining from this research. I have the privilege of presenting this research to you today, and building my career off of this research, even though it's a collaborative research project, and also knowing that the participants do come from marginalized identities, and oftentimes writing is not a priority for them. But what I have done and continue to do is stay in touch with them, share with them when I have opportunities like this to share their voices. I was in Greece for the past 2 years, so I was able to meet with them and share pictures of the art exhibit in Los Angeles. And I do share, I have one article that's been published off of this research, but it's based on the ethical dilemma that I experienced. And so it was not co-authored by the participants, but I've offered other ways that we can collaborate. And so we're in constant communication and trying to find ways where we can collaborate. But I have not had any interest in co-authoring. And I think it's probably just due to the nature of my role as a researcher, as an academic, and needing to write as part of my academic trajectory. And needing to publish isn't a priority for the participants.
I'm just curious, how did they feel about, like you mentioned that you shared some of this and they know what you do, right? So what was their response to you publishing things, or kind of in many ways representing their stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. They're, from my assumption, from our exchanges, there's a lot of feelings of being grateful that they have the opportunity to have their voices shared with the public. A lot of pride in my sharing their voices with a community in academia and beyond academia. And so a lot of gratitude, a lot of pride, and they all are always excited about hearing the responses from when I share the project. And it's interesting because I've had opportunities where I've shared these images through either presentations or through arts-based exhibits, and audience members have wanted to connect with the participants. And so it's also provided an opportunity for other folks who are part of the LGBTQ community in the United States to reach out to the participants. And so it's also opened up for opportunities to bridge connection and community. And I know that I had individuals who attended the exhibit in LA who ended up traveling to Greece in the summer and participated in Greece's Pride Parade and met up with some of the participants. And so they were able to meet one another, and it provided an opportunity for them to build connections. And they were able to, folks who attended the LA exhibit were able to meet some of the participants in Greece and attend the Greece Pride Parade. And they were able to hang out and share experiences.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Another question is, are there any, and this is from April, are there any interventions being made by LGBTQ plus activists to train and educate police, border patrol, NGOs, et cetera, about the LGBTQ plus needs and identities outlined by your participants? That's another great question.
That's a really great question. And so I don't know specifically if there have been any recent intentions. The LGBTQ plus Refugees Welcome Collective is no longer active. The members of the collective separated, and the activists went off and did different things. And so I know that some folks who were formerly part of the collective are engaged in other social justice efforts, but not that I'm aware of in terms of any formal training or efforts to specifically educate Border Patrol NGOs. I do know that some of the members of the collective have gone on and presented at conferences or NGO gatherings, but I'm not sure if they have engaged in any formal trainings.
All right, thank you. Another question, I'm sneaking a few of my own questions in here, but please put more questions in the chat if you have them. But a question that I have is, whenever you do research projects, like when you're finished with them, you think to yourself, oh, I wish I would have done this way, or I wish I would have maybe approached this or thought differently. And I guess I'm just wondering, as once you finish this, what are some lessons that you learned, especially for some of the, there are some students who might be participating today. I also, I've been a faculty member for a long time, but I love learning lessons from people. So anything that you can think of?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I would say lessons learned is, well, for me, the most rewarding part of this project were the relationships that I built with my participants and feeling like I was welcomed by the community as both an insider and an outsider. And so when I'm engaging in research projects where there is taking academic knowledge and sharing it with the community, there's an arts component. I would say the relationships are incredibly important, and being able to maintain those relationships in order to have continual consent. So being able to share with the participants, okay, I'm thinking about doing this presentation. Are you still okay with me representing your photographs? You know, how do you identify? Is there anything that you want me to update with regards to your story? Are you okay with me publishing this photograph in an academic journal? So making sure that you're obtaining continual consent so that you're being as ethical as possible. One of the other lessons learned, this was the first time I've done a lot of Photovoice projects, and one of the ethical dilemmas that came up that I didn't mention when I was presenting is working with interpreters. One of the lessons learned is when I'm paying participants and when I'm paying interpreters, because I did pay the interpreters for their time, I would say we collectively decided on how much the participants would be reimbursed for their time, and we collectively identified an amount that the interpreters would be paid for their time each hour of translation. And oftentimes the translating lasted longer than anticipated. And so there was an instance where the translator was actually paid more money than the participant who was sharing their story. And while both were part of the LGBTQ collective, the participants said, it's not fair that this translator who has the privilege of education is getting paid more for their time when I'm sharing my story. And so that was one of the lessons learned of, you know, what is fair compensation? What does it mean when one of the more privileged members of the collective is more educated, has the ability to be a translator? What happens when they're paid more than the actual participant who's sharing their story of their journey? And so I think that just being aware that that might be an issue, being able to talk about it, being really transparent with my mistakes, and, you know, engaging in qualitative research, engaging in arts-based research, engaging in participatory research, it is messy and complicated. And I think being as transparent as possible is really important as a researcher. Not being afraid to be vulnerable. I was very open to critique, very open to changing the way that I was navigating my role within the research project based on the direction that the participants wanted to take the project in. And then I think just being really attentive to power dynamics, I think is another lesson learned, is just knowing that as a researcher, there's an inherent power in being a researcher, and I embody privilege, and I embody identities that afford me with privilege and access to resources that my participants didn't always have, and being able to use that power and privilege to have power with and to engage in empowering acts and not have power over the participants. So really paying attention to the power dynamics and taking the lead from the participants themselves, and admitting that, you know, maybe it was you know, a really bad idea to pay interpreters based on time, and maybe it was a better idea to pay them based on an interview, because that's how the participants were reimbursed, based on the interview, regardless of how long it lasted, whereas the interpreters were paid based on an hourly rate, and so it created that inequity.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting too, because just of how much interpreters of all kinds are paid, you know, like whether it's what's interpreters for, you know, the deaf, or it's interpreters with other languages. They tend to be paid at a fairly highly rate, and then also you know, paid by the hour, right? That, which is interesting. So this, I think we may have answered this, but I just want to make sure. One of the folks said, did participants receive incentives to take part in the research? And so you talked about compensation, but were there any other incentives for participating?
Yeah, so all participants received 50 euros, which I would say is approximately about $65 to participate in the project. They also, as a collective, all of the proceeds made from the research, from the Photovoice exhibit went back to the collective. And so then the collective was able to determine how they wanted to use that money. Many of the members of the collective used that money to pay for participants or members of the collective's legal fees, or access to resources to transition, or for transportation. And so the participants had an incentive, monetary incentive, a personal monetary incentive, an incentive to gain money for the collective, and also to share their experiences with the community, and really challenge some of the stereotypes and stigma and assumptions that people have about their lives. And so those, I would say, were the main incentives by the participants.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Those are all the questions that we have. If there, oh, wait, no, I just got another one. Hold on. One more question. You mentioned earlier that this project wasn't funded. How did you manage to cover the compensation for participation and other costs?
Oh, great question. So it was all out of pocket. It was all out of pocket. And I've been fortunate enough to receive grant money when I've done Photovoice projects through my university. But I had a really hard time applying for grants and trying to get them funded when I was proposing to do international research. And so a lot of the money that I was getting to do research in the state of California was coming from foundations. The university didn't support, monetarily didn't support this project. And so I self-support this project. But what I loved, and so I would say when I think about the cost, I'm lucky that my family is from Greece, and so I stayed with family, so I didn't have any cost of living expenses. I only had the expenses of printing off the photos, paying the translators, and paying the participants. I was also really fortunate to have a lot of family and friends who helped with printing costs. I have a really strong community in Greece, and I had friends and family step up and helping with curating, helping with printing costs. I tapped into all of my community members who had various expertise, and they were passionate about this project. And so everybody chipped in, and I would say this project didn't cost more than about, I would say maybe $1,500, $2,000 US dollars, because I had so many people step up and volunteer. Yes, I know somebody who works in printing. We can print off flyers for this project. I know somebody who does translating, and they can translate not just translate in the interviews, but translate for the brochures. Because at the art exhibit, we had 3 different languages represented next to the photos. All the photos had the captions in English and Greek and in the participants' native language. And so I tapped into my different networks and my community, and I had a lot of volunteers who were passionate about the project. And the collective also, the LGBTQ plus refugee collective, was really supportive of the project, and a lot of people volunteered their time and their energy. And so it was a really incredible way to build community, build solidarity, build friendships. And so I was really, really lucky to have a lot of people in my life who were invested in the project. So there's a lot of grassroots organizing around this project. And so I wasn't able to obtain funding from the United States, but I was able to, with the help of friends and family, support the project, and then a little bit of my own personal funding was put into the project as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's just so interesting how you sort of cobbled together through community, and it's just very, very interesting. Sometimes I think people don't understand how we end up doing research, right? So
yes.
Here's a great question. What advice would you give to graduate students and researchers who plan to do work with community partners?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. The advice I would say is, well, first off, come to the project with love and passion, and the intent to be as collaborative as possible, and come to the research understanding power dynamics, understanding your own intersecting identities, and how those play out in your relationships with community partners. I would say also be very transparent about why you want to do the research, why you want to collaborate, what the purpose is of the research, why it's important to you. Be open to having the research project take a different direction than maybe you had envisioned, and that allow for the space to engage in co-construction of knowledge, collaboration. Be willing to let go of any agendas that you might have. I know that I have certain visions, but sometimes my visions don't always pan out. For example, with this particular project, I really wanted to invite those organizations, those NGOs that didn't want to collaborate with me. And I really wanted to, to be honest, I know this doesn't sound very nice, but I really wanted them to see that I was able to do this project even without your work. And so I really wanted to just turn around and say, you know what, I ended up being able to do this. And even though you didn't want to collaborate with me, I was able to collaborate with a grassroots collective that was really passionate about doing this project with me. But the grassroots collective looked at my list of people that I wanted to invite, and they had issues with some of the people on my list because they said, this NGO has not treated us kindly, and we don't want them to invite them into our space. And so I really wanted to invite particular NGOs because I felt like they were the ones who needed to really hear this. And they were the ones who needed to, because they were the ones getting funded while this grassroots collective was doing all of this work without any government support. So I wanted the art exhibit to be a space where relationships can be built, where community partnerships could be cultivated beyond just this one project. But members of the collective said, we actually don't want specific NGOs on the list because we don't feel like it's a safe, we want this to be a safe space, and we don't like their policies. We don't like the ways in which they operate, the ways in which they felt like there was a lot of corruption with some of the NGOs taking money from the United Nations, but never really putting that money towards the clients at their organizations, but their budgets were not transparent. And so that's where I struggled, because I had my own agenda and my visions for how I wanted this project to transform the ways in which the non-governmental organizations operated. But then the collective said, we have been operating outside of these oppressive institutional structures. This has worked for our community. We don't want these folks to be invited. And so for me, I would say, as a researcher, being able to give up and let go of some of your visions if they don't align with the visions of the community that you're partnering with, and really providing the space to have the community take control and power with how they want this project to be shared with the larger, broader public, and really honoring the voices and the desires of the communities that you're engaging with, and just being mindful of those power dynamics And so, so that's what I did in this situation. It was kind of one of those other ethical dilemmas of, what do I do? Because I really want these NGOs to hear this. I really want them to be exposed to this, but I also didn't want to have my desire overpower the desire of the collective who said, we don't want them to be at this event.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really, really good advice, because there are people who would just be researchers who would just be resistant and say, this is what my plan was. It's my research. I'm going to do it the way I want, right? I mean, we've
Yes.
all seen people do that.
Yes.
So thank you. Yeah, I guess one of the things that I've learned over time is that you just have to learn to be flexible, and you have to, learn to kind of, I don't know if the phrase is like roll with the punches, right? If it doesn't work out, you got to pick yourself up and figure out ways, and then be collaborative as well. So this, I think you touched a little bit upon,
Yes.
but did you encounter any gatekeeping besides, I mean, that was kind of, but not maybe not the kind of gatekeeping this person might be talking about.
Yeah, actually, I think that the example that I just provided is an example of gatekeeping from the collectives approach. They really wanted to be the ones to determine who we would invite.
Right.
And I feel like I encountered gatekeeping with the NGOs who did not want me to talk to the clients of their organizations under the guise of, well, I don't know if our participants could handle it. They're really vulnerable, and they're participating in your project is just not in their best interest. And I found that really paternalistic from the NGOs perspective, because I said, I would at least appreciate if you could just let them know that this project is taking place, and then they can decide for themselves if they want to participate. So I encountered gatekeeping also through the nonprofit organizations who didn't even allow me to have access to the clients of their organizations. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of gatekeeping going on, I think, from a lot of key players in this project. That's a great question. Thank you.
All right. All right. One last call to see if there are any other questions before we wrap up today. Just want to make sure we get everyone. I think we have no more questions. So I just want to say thank you. This was great. I learned so much, such interesting research, and just this whole idea of doing things through interpreters too is just very, very interesting. And thank you so much, and for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and your methodologies and your perspectives. And we hope everybody learned a lot today. And also want to give a shout out to Natalie and Brandy for managing our tech today. And I hope that everybody has a good rest of the afternoon, and does do something good for yourself today as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Brandy, and thank you all for your time and for hearing my experiences. And feel free to reach out to me if you want to connect more, if you want me to send you anything related to the study or the article that's already been published. So thank you so much, everyone. Take care, everyone.
And we will be sending out a recording of this too, so you'll have it in case you want to use it in classes or anything like that. Thanks, everybody. Take good care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.